It's like watching a bank install high-tech cameras everywhere, except the one room where the vault is kept. You're told everything is under control. You're shown numbers, speed, efficiency. But the one question that matters? Suddenly, blurred, delayed, restricted. So here's the question. When the system moves fast everywhere else, why does it freeze right here? This is not a routine hearing. This is a stress test of credibility. Live. On record. In a Senate chamber, John Kennedy doesn't attack. He calibrates. He opens with praise. 33 hours to catch a suspect, 40 hours to solve another case. Clean, efficient, impressive. Across from him sits Kash Patel, confident, composed, leaning into the narrative that the FBI is now apolitical, focused, restored. And for a moment, it works. The room settles. The story feels stable. Then Kennedy pivots. No warning, no buildup. Just a name, Jeffrey Epstein. The tone shifts. The pace tightens. Kennedy asks the question the public has been asking for years. Who else was involved? Patel answers, there is no credible information. And just like that, the most anticipated answer becomes the most controlled one. The words land clean, almost rehearsed. No credible information. Not denial, not confirmation, just a boundary. And in a room built on answers, that boundary is everything. Because what was said is precise, but what wasn't said is louder. John Kennedy doesn't interrupt right away. He lets it sit. That's the technique. Let the answer breathe long enough for the contradiction to surface on its own. Moments earlier, Kash Patel had described an agency capable of tracking networks, intercepting threats, coordinating across jurisdictions, and closing cases in under 2 days. A system that can map connections, extract patterns, and act with speed. But now, under the same oath, the same authority, the same access to federal case files, the answer narrows. It shrinks. It retreats into limitations. Patel begins to explain. He references the 2006 to 2007 investigation. He points to the non-prosecution agreement. He invokes 3 separate court orders restricting disclosure. He frames the issue as legal, procedural, constrained, Department of Justice policy, judicial boundaries, historical decisions that hamstrung the case. And this is where the logic tightens. Because none of those explanations are new. They are the exact same structural defenses used for years across administrations, across leadership changes, across promises of transparency. The names change. The framing changes. But the outcome? Identical. Kennedy presses again, not aggressively, but deliberately. The American public wants to know who else was involved. That's not speculation. That's the central question of the entire case. And Patel doesn't expand. He reaffirms the limit. No credible information. So now the contradiction is no longer subtle. An agency that can uncover complex criminal networks in hours cannot identify a single additional participant in one of the most documented trafficking cases in modern history. And this is where the hearing stops being procedural and turns prosecutorial. Because once you strip away the tone, the numbers, the positioning, what you're left with is a timeline, and timelines don't lie. The Epstein investigation didn't begin yesterday. It traces back to 2006, constrained by a non-prosecution agreement negotiated under Alexander Acosta that limited scope, sealed potential leads, and effectively narrowed what investigators could pursue. That agreement didn't just close a case, it defined the boundaries of every investigation that followed. Then 2018. Federal charges reemerge in the Southern District of New York. The case is reopened, publicly reframed, politically elevated. And yet, even with renewed authority, expanded scrutiny, and years of public pressure, no additional charged network is formally established beyond Jeffrey Epstein himself. Now fast forward to this hearing. Kash Patel stands under oath acknowledging partial review of the files, not full, partial, and asserts that based on credible information, there are no other individuals identified in the case file. Pause there. Because in any other investigation, partial review would never support a definitive-sounding conclusion. In any courtroom, that gap alone would be enough to challenge the weight of the statement. You cannot simultaneously claim incomplete review and complete certainty. That is not how evidence works. So now, the logic begins to stack. You have an original investigation that was limited. You have subsequent investigations operating within those limits. You have legal barriers, court orders, privacy laws, procedural constraints, layered on top. And you have a present-day leadership promising transparency, while citing those same inherited limitations as the reason transparency could not be fully delivered. That's not a resolution. That's a closed loop. And John Kennedy knows it. He doesn't need to accuse. He just needs to hold the structure in place long enough for it to reveal itself. Because the contradiction isn't emotional, it's mechanical. The FBI can coordinate multi-state operations in under 48 hours. It can track digital communications, analyze networks, and extract patterns across thousands of data points. It can identify co-conspirators in organized crime, terrorism, financial fraud. That capability is not in question. So when that same institution says that after nearly 2 decades of one of the most scrutinized cases in modern history, there is no additional credible information, the issue isn't capability, it's scope, it's definition, it's what qualifies as credible, who determines that threshold, and what never crosses it. And this is the moment where the hearing becomes something else entirely. Because this isn't about whether other individuals exist. Patel even leaves that door slightly open, carefully, legally, by stating he is not saying others were not involved. But that's not the standard being applied. The standard being applied is what can be confirmed, released, and defended within the narrowest legal interpretation possible. And that distinction matters. Because history doesn't operate on what is convenient to confirm. It operates on what is pursued, what is prioritized, and what is allowed to surface. So now the question shifts. Not who else was involved, but what information never becomes credible because it never gets the chance to be fully uncovered? And this is where the hearing crosses a line, from analysis into accountability. Because behind every legal phrase, every court order, every limitation, there are real people, not abstract victims, not case numbers, young women, some minors, trafficked, documented, named in fragments, but never fully represented in the outcome. And while the system debates what qualifies as credible, their reality was never conditional. It happened. It existed. It left consequences that don't disappear behind sealed files. Kash Patel says the system is doing everything legally permitted. That may be true, but legality is not the same as completeness. And for the public, that gap is where trust breaks, because if the law defines the limit, who defines whether the law itself was ever enough? John Kennedy doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The contrast is already visible. On one side, an institution capable of speed, precision, and reach. On the other, a case that remains contained, narrowed, unresolved in the ways that matter most. This is no longer about Republican or Democrat. This is about whether the same system that can act decisively against ordinary crime applies the same intensity when power enters the frame. Whether the rules bend, or whether they quietly hold, just enough to stop short of something bigger. Because if the answer to the most persistent question in this case is still no credible information, then the real question becomes unavoidable. Is the truth missing, or was it never allowed to fully exist on record? If moments like this matter to you, where answers sound complete but leave something essential untouched, hit like, drop your perspective in the comments, share this with someone who still believes the system always goes all the way, and subscribe. Because this isn't where the story ends.